Good evening, YouTube. I'm making a little soup because it's cold. It's not freezing and snowing quite yet, but cold enough for soup. And today at the market, I saw people, they had soup in a can on sale, and I saw people just loading case after case after case of the stuff in there. I thought, why in the world aren't you just going over to the vegetable section and buying vegetables and making your own? It was vegetable soup. Campbell's, I think, vegetable soup. Or Chunky or something. I don't know what brand it was, quite honestly. And I'm sure they make a fine product, but it's just so incredibly simple and drastically cheaper. I'm going to make this whole Dutch oven, probably 3.5 quart size, I think it is, 3.5 liter size. Probably going to make that almost all the way full for about $1. So what is that? 4, 5, 6 cans worth, maybe, something like that. It's just my standard issue vegetable soup. It's what I've got in the pantry pretty much at all times, but you could certainly vary it to whatever you got available. There's just a couple little tricks I was going to show you. Basically, I'm turning on the camera because I'm making dinner anyway. This isn't really a haute cuisine kind of video, but real basics on soup making, and again, this applies for everything, but I've got a few aromatics. I've got a little bit of celery and garlic in there with just a little bit of oil. I want to infuse that oil with the garlic is basically what I'm trying to accomplish there. And that'll become the base for everything else. Let me go grab a spatula. But by getting that oil infused, that's going to get more flavor out of the garlic and get it going right from the get-go. And then on everything else, basically, I'm just going to cut it into pieces that I think are going to cook mostly evenly. So a little bit smaller carrot, a little bit bigger potato, relatively fine, relatively coarse chop on my onions. I'm going to go ahead and get the onions in first because I want to sweat them down and again exude a lot of that flavor into the pot. Once I get everything in there, I'm going to stop and actually do the real math for you. But I think this whole pot will cost me about $1. I'm guessing right. You want to make sure and not let that garlic burn. I'm over a medium heat here. And I'm using this cast iron Dutch oven because it holds heat so well. But cast iron Dutch ovens are kind of like flying in a hot air balloon. You sort of have to think ahead since the heat stays in the iron so well. So you don't want to crank it all the way up because turning the heat down doesn't instantly lower the heat. So you want to ease up into any temperature that you're after. So again, I think a medium is just fine to get this going. Sweat those onions down, get that garlic infused. Soup in general is just about layering flavors. There's just really not much more technique to it. Oh wait, I forgot my other half of my onion here. And as you can see, I'm doing very rough chop. If I was making a really big batch, I'd probably go over here to the food processor to make my life a little bit easier, but for this is just for myself. I don't think the cats want any tonight. So just as easy to go manual. I see people that this time of year especially, people try to bring it to everyone's attention that some folks are struggling on food costs, food pantry costs, which is absolutely true. Donate to your local pantries if you can, but more importantly, folks that are really kind of on their last budget legs, learn how to cook some of these super cheap basics because good foods, nutritious food, all of these vegetables, quite frankly, I got really good deals on all these. The potatoes are running about 15 cents a pound up here this time of year, so that was nice and cheap. That's maybe 800 grams worth of potatoes there, so that's what, 25 cents worth. Carrots are about 50 cents a pound, and this is probably a pound of them, so I'm up to 75 cents. I've got a little tiny bit of the onion is probably another 10, 12 cents. The celery, I happen to know I grabbed at the discount rack, the stuff that needs to be cooked that night. Every grocery store seems to have one these days, so that was that's less than 10 cents worth of celery in there. I grew the garlic myself, so but I'm guessing what, another nickel for a couple cloves of garlic. Some of the other flavor add-ons, I've got my own homemade stock here. This is just homemade vegetable stock, and this was free. And I say it's free because I took all the scraps, the leftover carrot peels and the leftover onion ends and all that sort of stuff. And I do this once a week. Every Sunday I make a big vat of vegetable stock, and I keep it for the week. All you do is throw all those scraps in, a little bit of seasoning, and I actually put in just a spoonful of Marmite yeast extract, which adds kind of a richness, a bottom note flavor, if you will. Some people would say umami, but I hate using all those buzzwords. So just a teaspoon of Marmite extract, a bunch of vegetable scraps, and water to cover. Simmer it for an hour, and you've got yourself free vegetable stock. That's really all there is to it. I can't make vegetable stock any cheaper for you than free. Getting just a little bit of color. What I'm really watching here is the smell. Once I get that aromatic, I know that I've got those flavors out like I want them, and that's when I can start going in with my other ingredients. One of the other little tricks, these are the rinds from Parmesan, the really, really brick hard rinds that you absolutely just can't grate any farther. I always save them because that is really good flavor in the stock. And this is, I get these smoked hams from Quebec, but they come with the pork skin on the outside of them, but the pork skin is still smoked. So this is a huge amount of flavor. I'm going to throw that in there to soak and add flavor. And of course, I'll pull it out before I serve it because it's still a little too chewy for consumption. I've also got some of my magic orange. All this is I've taken chilies. I think in this case it was Thai chilies, maybe habaneros, I'm not sure. Chilies, blended them down in the blender with just a little bit of water to make a slurry, added salt and vinegar, roughly equal portions of pepper slurry and vinegar, and then salt to taste. And that's just my jolt. It's kind of like a pour-ons Tabasco sauce, if you will. It's not aged at all. But for cooking, when I just want to add a little bit of zing, a little bit of that acidity to brighten up a flavor, that works really, really well. And I think I made a big, huge mason jar of this stuff, probably less than 30 cents. And this is, what, a nickel's worth in this whole bottle, and I won't use all of it. Also, going to get a nice jolt of soy in there. I like the soy because it begins to add richness, and of course we'll need some salt in there. The stock I leave unsalted because I want the stock to be more flexible. In some places I want salt, some places I don't. So I leave my stock unsalted, but you need to make sure you know that it's unsalted so that you can add accordingly based on each individual recipe. I'm going to go in with the carrots now because they're harder, need a little bit longer to cook. It's time to get some liquid in here. This is just washing out the bottom of a mason jar that had some tomato salsa in it, so there was a little bit of flavor there. I don't let even a drop of flavor go to waste when I can. I'm going to have potatoes in there, but I'm not going to add them for a little bit. I want the carrots, like I say, to simmer just a bit. And then at the very end, I've got just a handful of leftover frozen peas. Those are from my garden, but if you were to buy these, that's what, maybe 10 cents worth of frozen peas. Are we at $1 yet? I think we might be to $1. Somebody go back and edit my math real fast. That in there, and I'm going to go ahead and go in with my stock, get it up to temperature. Nope, got a little bit left over in the bottom. If you don't have stock, that's okay. You can just use water. You're just going to want to probably simmer it a little bit longer because in effect you're making stock in the soup. The beauty of the beauty of soup is that it's kind of an equal opportunity recipe in that anything you've got laying around will go in there. I make corn chowder all the time, same sort of approach. I take leftover bits of corn. I even simmer corn cobs in the stock that I make for that sometimes because there's a lot of flavor left in those cobs. And you can, by the way, you can make this as chunky or as unusual shape-wise as you want. I like all kinds of different shapes and sizes. As long as on the potatoes, they're going to cook a little bit easier. So as long as they're reasonably close to the same size, they'll cook okay. I'm doing a monkey's uncle job of chopping here, I know, but I've got I've got two cats running around behind me. I don't usually chop over here on the elevated platform, but I don't want to be carting potatoes back and forth from my usual chopping space because the cats will be underfoot. So yeah, just hack it up. If this doesn't prove that anyone can make soup, I don't know what would. This is absolutely not fancy schmancy chef cookery, but boy will it taste good, especially since the weather has finally gone a little bit colder. It's not, like I say, today is kind of unusually warm. I think it was 7 or 8 degrees. That's Celsius for you folks down in America. What is that, 55, 50 degrees, something like that. But we've had freezing nights. And so that reminds me of something else I wanted to point out to you guys. I mentioned earlier that I grew my own garlic. Let me show you something real quick. If your head of garlic is doing this and it's starting to sprout, guess what? You can grow garlic. Just grab yourself a pot of soil, stick them down in the dirt, and do that this time of year. Believe it or not, going into winter is the time to plant garlic. And I'm going to plant it probably this deep, like double the depth. I want the top to be at least the height of the garlic and a little bit more. So plant it about that deep in the soil while it's still soft. That you don't want to plant it too shallow because you don't want the frost heave, the freezing ground, to push it up out of the ground. And then maybe put some hay or some mulch over the top of it just to protect it a little bit more. And then walk away from it. Leave them about, oh, I don't know, what is that, about 6 inches, 4, 5, 6 inches apart like that. Cover them up with the soil all the way. Make sure that they are pointing up so that the green sprout is going towards the top. And even if it's not sprouted, you can still do this. One head of garlic that you get at the grocery store is probably going to have, what, 8, 9 cloves. It's going to give you 8 or 9 plants spaced out like that. And then come back, you know, they're going to pop up in the spring. Come back in the middle of summer, and when the garlic plants have died down, the tops have almost all completely died down and gone brown, you can harvest full fat garlic cloves. But the garlic needs that probably 6, 7 weeks of cold weather to really make nice big fat bulbs. It will still flower and it will still make you a garlic bulb if you don't plant it over the winter, but literally shoving this 2 fingers, 2 knuckles deep in soil is all you got to do, and that's it. Garlic is kind of a hands-off, zero maintenance sort of plant. But anyway, I just planted 2 dozen of these in pots. I'll transplant them out to the garden when spring comes around. But I thought you guys should know that little tip too, because almost all the stuff in the grocery store will work perfectly well. It hasn't been treated to prevent it from sprouting. You don't have to go buy fancy schmancy varieties, although they can be very lovely if you do. But you don't have to buy fancy varieties that are called sprouting bulbs. Basically, you just want a bulb that hasn't been treated. If you're like me, a lot of times the bulbs are going to sprout automatically on you. So that's one way to know for sure that your garlic from the grocery store hasn't been treated. It's your little gardening tip for the day. See how we're doing. The cats are yelling at me back here because they think I'm talking to them. They still haven't figured out quite why I talk to the magic box as much as I do. Go up on temperature just a little bit. Now I'm going to get, like I say, just a tiny bit of soy in there. That's part of my salty seasoning. I will, of course, adjust salt a little later on. I also want to get some tomatoes. This is just a tin of grocery store tomatoes. Cost me 85 cents up here. And I don't need the tomato sauce in there, or the tomato juice, I should say. You just could certainly throw it in there, but I'm going to use that tomato juice for making a fabulous rice later on in the week. probably tomorrow or the next day. But I do want some tomatoes to go in there. I think that's about right. So that's what, another 20, 30 cents worth of tomatoes, about half of that can and not the juice. All right, so maybe my soup is up to $1.25 now. I'm not really sure what the final tally will be, but cheaper than a can, that's for sure. And I want to get a dose of this chili sauce in there, pepper sauce, I should say, just to get it going. And I'm going to get some peppercorn as well. People ask me sometimes, why would I use chili peppers and peppercorn? Well, they're just two different flavors, that's why. Granted, they're both, quote, peppery and hot, but they are a different kind of peppery and hot from each other. So, go in with a little of that. If you wanted to put in cumin, that's great. If you wanted to put in rosemary, that's great. If you wanted to put in oregano, that's great. Whatever works. Just pardon my noise here. That's 1, 2, I'm going to call that 2.5 teaspoons, maybe, well, not even that, probably 2 teaspoons or a little less actually. But freshly ground. You use less when it's freshly ground. You get better flavor when it's freshly ground. Fennel, if you want to crack some fennel, that's another interesting flavor. If you wanted to do some roast squash, this is butternut, I guess it is. You could certainly peel and roast this. For that matter, you could roast it with the peel on and then squish it out of the peel if you want to just do halves. But I usually peel it and chunk it up into, oh, I don't know, 1.5, 2-inch cubes. That way I can get some nice char around all the edges. That's a really nice addition to your vegetable soup. Really, whatever you want. Cabbage works really well in this soup, but one thing about cabbage, brassicas in general, cabbage, broccoli, those sorts of things, they don't need a whole lot of cooking, and if you cook them too long, they get that nasty sort of musty smell to them and musty taste. So when I'm going to use something from the brassica family, like a cabbage or a broccoli, I don't add it in until very late in the process, and I make sure that I eat all the soup that night because it's not going to reheat that well. This, without brassica and without cabbage in it, I could reheat this. God, I can probably eat this for the next 3 days when I get some good bread. I think I got some of my bread. Remember, on another one of my streams, I think I made some of my rye bread. This is my rye bread here. See, it's got that beautiful crumb in there. But you could add, I showed that to you because I'm going to eat it with the soup. But you could add, like they do a lot of times in Italy, you could add breadcrumbs to thicken the soup. You could add yesterday's mashed potatoes to thicken the soup if you want your soup thicker. Really, just one of the most opportunistic pots that you can make on the cheap. So I'm going to let that come up to temperature. Probably cook it for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, and then I'm going to go in with the potatoes and cook the potatoes until they're tender. That's probably another 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to leave this up while that comes to a simmer and go see how the computer's doing. This is all still computer testing. I'm still waiting on my good mic to come from China. If you guys know any better, good, cheap mics, let me know, because I need one, obviously, if you can hear. But I'm going to let this simmer for a little bit, and I'll come back to you to the stream here in just a few seconds. coming up nicely. Bubbling along, doing well. Like I say, I just want to soften those carrots a tiny bit before I go on with my potatoes. I mentioned earlier I'm using my own stock. If you guys need to use water, kind of make the stock in the pot using water, but go ahead and add for 3/4, I'm going to say maybe a teaspoon or less of the Marmite. And if you don't have Marmite or Vegemite laying around, nutritional yeast actually will give you that same sort of character. It's kind of a chicken stocky meets cheesy sort of flavor. That'll work really well. Of course, remember we've got those Parmesan rinds in there. That'll also add a depth of flavor. Any or all of those will help give you that richness of flavor that will make it seem like you simmered this stuff for hours and hours and hours like an old Italian grandmother. Absolutely not necessary. This soup will be ready to eat in probably 30 minutes, 45 minutes at most. Long enough to go make a batch of bread, make some crackers, something along those lines. You'll also notice that I didn't add any salt other than the soy sauce. I will want to adjust the salt. I may not need any more after the soy, but I want to leave that out so I don't forget. And I am kind of a nut for the pepper sauce, so I'll probably save some of that for serving as well. So here's my ladle trick, right? So I bought this ladle, just standard issue restaurant supply store, and the handle on it was straight. It came straight out like this. One of the stupidest little things I discovered is if you bend your ladle at this little angle, it will sit and hold, and it's easier to manipulate. I'm going in like this rather than kind of cockamamie with my arm. Bend your ladle just a little tiny bit, and it will be much more functional. I know, sounds crazy, but it really works. This is really starting to smell good. Get a big piece of carrot just to test here, see how well it's coming along. If I can nab one. Almost there. I want the carrots about, oh, I don't know, halfway done when I throw the potatoes in. So while I was away, I was thinking through the math, and I think technically this is probably going to be, I should say accurately rather than technically. I think accurately this is going to cost me about $1.27 to make this 3.5 liters of stock, 3.5 liters of soup, I should say. But that $1.27 is Canadian. So I guess it's almost still a buck for you folks down in America. $1 to make 3.5 quarts or 3.5 liters of soup is just, I don't know, what's a can cost? A can cost you a buck, buck and a quarter, and it's 8 ounces, 10 ounces, 12 ounces. I haven't bought canned soup in forever. I don't even buy, a lot of times people buy the cream of mushroom or cream of celery or cream of whatever soup. And I don't buy any of those things. I just make them fresh. I can't tell you how much more flavorful it is than the canned stuff. And you can always find really cheap mushrooms, really cheap vegetables over in that please buy this today section of the produce aisle at your grocery store. There's always stuff there that is perfect for making soup, and it's always dirt cheap. I know up here my local place has these plastic bags with $1 stamped on them. And so whatever they shove in the bag, it's $1. So it might be, I don't know, a stalk of celery, 2 onions, and an avocado on its last eggs. Or it might be 3 lemons, 4 carrots, and a turnip. Who knows? But all of that stuff is just absolutely perfect for winter stock making on the cheap. I always go in to soup making efforts by thinking in terms of what does it cost me per pound. Potatoes up here, being in Potato Central, potatoes are a fabulous bargain for us right now. I think I got 10 pounds for $1.50, so 15 cents a pound for prime potatoes. I go to B grade potatoes, which have a few more spots and need a little bit more trimming on them. You can get them for 6-7 cents a pound up here. But that's why we live in Potato Central. All right, so obviously the potatoes went in. They need to simmer till they're done. That's going to be about 10-15 minutes, I would suspect. Might need just a little bit more liquid. This is just water, rinse water going in. But yeah, I'm going to get that whole Dutch oven full of soup. I just have to remember I need to fish out that piece of smoked pork fat, and I need to find the Parmesan rinds. Those Parmesan rinds, they will soften up some, but they still aren't edible, so you definitely want to fish them out. And in the meantime, I'll make a cup of tea. Because it's always time for a cup of tea in my house. I know in this day and age, some people are still going to complain about it taking half an hour to make soup, which just seems silly to me. But guess what? In that half hour, I'm doing other things. I'm working on the computer stream, and I'm working on washing the dishes and everything. My kitchen will be spotless by the time I take this into the bowl because I've done all the work while it simmers. Time and management. Time and management, people. All right, I'm going to let that simmer a little bit longer. That's for my tea, not for my soup. If you didn't want the soup quite that dark, you could certainly use light soy. I used dark soy this time. Or you could leave the soy out and just salt it. That's fine too. Some people like it lighter, some people like it darker. I just care that it tastes good. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and check that salt content. Pretty close, but I'm going to give it just a tiny bit more. We got a lot of potatoes in there, so that was another, what, teaspoon? I think that should be plenty. If you only had tinned vegetables, canned vegetables, they will work, but I always get better luck if I don't have anything out of the garden. I always get better luck with frozen, especially if you're going to go ahead and cook it some more in the context of a soup. Tinned vegetables have their place, but the additional cooking time of soup is going to make them a little bit more mushy than you might want. So I would recommend going for frozen. I think nowadays frozen and tinned are about the same price, if I'm not mistaken. Or, of course, I'm going to tell you to go plant a garden, if you can. Granted, even gardeners of the world have to improvise when winter comes around. Always taste your food as you go. Yep, that's just about perfect for the salt and for the pepper. I get just a little hint of that pepper, the black pepper as well as the chili pepper. Excellent. I'm pleased with that. The cats even smell it and say it's good. What are you yelling about over there? You don't like soup. There's no tuna up here, I promise. You want to say hello to the internet? Come here. No, you don't want to. No, she's not into being a star tonight. Unlike every other night that I've got the camera out, she wants to be right in the thick of things. Time to make some more bread, but this is the very last of my last loaf. And it will be fine with soup, obviously. Don't have to toast it. I've gotten to a point now where I'm making a loaf of bread every at least every third day, if not every other day. And when you do that and you end up with the leftover ends, if you're not eating soup, the leftover ends of bread are so insanely useful. And you can keep them forever. You just blend them into breadcrumbs in your food processor and throw them in the freezer. You can use them on top of mac and cheese. You can use them thickened soups, like I said earlier. Just all kinds of places for leftover bread to go. And I was doing the math, just like I do on everything I make now. And a loaf of bread cost me 30 cents to make. So people say, oh, I can get discount bread, the day-old bread, for half price. Well, even half price is still $1, maybe 75 cents if you're lucky. So I'm even half of that, 30 cents. And all it takes is 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes when you come home, or if you're working from home like I do, 5 minutes, an hour, hour and a half later. Let the machine do all the work. Just, you don't have to be fancy schmancy bread maker. You can make just ordinary basic, like this is my rye loaf. You can make an ordinary oat loaf or white loaf. Your first batch will be a disaster. Your second loaf will be slightly better. And then by your fifth loaf, you will say, why in the world have I not been making this myself all these years? Think of all the money you spend on all the baking. I make all my own flour tortillas and loaves of bread and hamburger buns and hot dog buns and pita breads, all that sort of stuff. I've gotten to a point now, with practice, takes practice, that I do all of that myself for a fraction of the price. I get good Canadian all-purpose flour, and remember that our all-purpose flour up here is a little bit stronger than most. It's more protein than most, I should say, for all-purpose. I get it for 60 cents a kilo, which means a loaf of bread, literally, like I say, 30 cents. A little bit of salt, a little bit of yeast. Get your yeast at the restaurant supply store. It's cheap there. I get a pound for $3.50. A pound is a lot of yeast. A pound, even me making all my own stuff, a pound lasts me probably 6-7 months. And I go through a lot of yeast. So just a few extra pennies for the salt and the yeast components there. A little bit of oil sometimes. I think my tea is ready. Pardon me while I go drain. I've gotten off sugar in my tea. I used to drink lots of sugar in it. Now, unless I'm making chai. If I'm making chai, I definitely put sugar in it. But I don't know why I did that. It just started one day. I think I was out of sugar. And I tried it, and it was fine. No reason really to add more in there. I eat plenty of sugar cookies, however, on the side with my tea, so don't think I'm doing it to be healthy. But if you can cut down throwing an extra tablespoon of sugar in your tea, I drink a lot of tea. I drink easily 3 cups a day, if not 5 or 6. If I'm writing, I'll drink 7 or 8. Tea. I drink Assam. So if there's anybody watching in Assam that wants to barter chests of a good Assam first flush tea, or for that matter, I like fall flush too from Assam. You want to barter tea for lobsters? Send me an email. You send me a tea chest full of tea and I will return a tea chest full of lobsters to you. Or potatoes, or whatever else we've got up here. Blueberries, that's what I can send you. I can send you blueberries. I'm sitting here tending this, but, you know, quite frankly, you don't need to. You could just as easily put the cover on this, walk away, and come back in 30 minutes. I'm only tending it because I've got the live stream going. I really am sorry that I haven't gotten that better mic yet, and some of the other upgrades I want to do before I start really doing these live streams in earnest. But I can only afford them when I get them cheap on eBay from China, so I've got to wait for the shipping time. I want to see where my potatoes are at, doneness wise. Almost there, breaking apart nicely. Oh. Just a couple more seconds so I can go in and add my peas. Go ahead and add my peas in. Gives it a nice bit of color. And of course, the pot can keep simmering and get even better. You just want to be careful not to overcook those potatoes into mush, at least not while you want it as soup. But the other thing I've discovered when I make a big pot of this, if I get down to the very last, I don't know, half liter, that I can then throw a cup of uncooked rice, a little bit more stock into, and make a, the rice will soak up all the liquid that's left over. You know how when you divvy up soup, you always end up with a little bit extra liquid left over. You get all the good bits, all the interesting pieces of vegetable. But yeah, the cup of rice trick, and simmer it, and then on day 2 or 3, whenever I get to the end of this pot of soup, becomes a completely different meal. You could even take that cooked rice soup finish, mash it up, and put it into like Indian dosas or something along those lines. Use it as a filling for dumplings, something along the lines of adding a dough or a starch around it. Works perfectly well. Don't let anything go to waste because it's pure flavor in there. It really is getting to be cool up here, which means I'm probably going to start making chai, proper chai. I always, when the winter mood hits, and especially around the holidays, I start doctoring up my tea with interesting spices. So in the next day or two, I'll probably do a live stream on how to make chai properly. And I'm not talking about that junk from a concentrate. I'm talking about starting with black tea and freshly crushed spices. Use my mortar and pestle. So if you guys want to see that, subscribe, and I will obviously pop up on your screens whenever that starts to happen. Chai is delicious stuff when the weather turns cold. Always a hit at Christmas parties. People want something a little bit different than the traditional cider sometimes, although I make a bunch of good traditional cider too with pretty much the same spices. But a little bit of an alternative choice for the old mugs of hot chocolate. That's delicious too. Actually, I make a lot of interesting drinks. Mayan hot chocolate with all kinds of crazy old spices in it. Chai spice, chai, proper chai. The cider, I didn't have enough apples off the trees this year to make a big batch of cider, so I've only got a couple cases in the works for fermenting it, making it into alcoholic cider. So I didn't have any leftover fresh cider, which is what I usually use to make my mulled cider with fresh. But you can certainly buy apple juice and doctor it up the way you want. The trick there is a gentle heating. I think we're just about done with this particular soup. As I say, it'll only get better with a little bit more simmer time. I'm going to go up down on temperature quite a ways. Set my tea down and serve up the first pot of this. I'm going to leave, again, that smoked pork rind in there and the Parmesan rinds. I'm going to keep a lookout for them, but for the first pot, or the first bowl, I should say, that is soup on the cheap in a hurry. Told you it was easy. A little bit of more pepper, because that's just the way I am. If you want to do Some Parmesan croutons on top. That's great. Another fabulous way to make something out of nothing. Leftover bread and a little bit of Parmesan. No matter what, no matter where you're at, you've got something in the fridge that you can turn into great, cheap soup. So go do it. I appreciate you guys watching and thumbs upping and liking and tweety, Facebooking and all that other stuff. Do subscribe if you want to see more of these. As I say, my equipment is en route to make these a little bit more polished, a little bit more interesting. And I will schedule them as the mood and the equipment and the opportunity strikes. So you guys go make some soup. Appreciate you watching. Talk to you soon. Cheers.